Welcome to episode 103 of Angela Watson's Truth for Teachers. I'm your host, Angela Watson, and I'm here to speak life, encouragement, and truth into the minds and hearts of educators and get you energized for the week ahead. Today, I'm talking to Persida Himmele about total participation techniques that will make every student an active learner. Visit truthforteachers.com to see an outline of the 5 strategies that she shares and download the free printable resources. So in this episode, I'm talking with Persida Himmele. I had the pleasure of meeting her and her husband several years ago at an ASCD conference, and we ended up not only chatting for hours, but have actually stayed in touch since then. I've reviewed the Himmele's book, I've had Persida guest post on my blog, and I wanted to invite her on the podcast for quite a while now, and I figured this was the perfect time because the new edition of their book, Total Participation Techniques, is coming out. And I found the first edition so helpful that I knew she would have some amazing strategies to share from the book with you here today. So the Himmeles are a husband and wife teacher team who have conducted over 500 presentations around the world. They're both professors currently in the education department at Millersville University in Pennsylvania, and they're passionate about designing cognitively engaging learning experiences. So I'm going to let you go ahead now and listen to Persida tell us about what a total participation technique is and how teachers can provide access to higher order thinking opportunities for all students. We're going to go through 5 specific examples then, which you can use in your classroom starting today. Go to truthforteachers.com and look for episode 103 if you want to download the free resources and printables that we discuss. Make sure you listen until the end because I feel like the last 10 minutes are really powerful. We're talking not only about equity and making sure that our own biases aren't affecting the way that we call on students and how we can use total participation techniques to make sure that all students have a chance to participate. But we're also talking about why teachers don't need to try to collect too many strategies where you're feeling like you're trying to do all these different things and keep track of them and you're constantly looking for new ideas. And we really delve into this idea that it's good to just pick 1 or 2 things from each of these different categories that Persida is giving us and then keep recycling those and use them over and over in your class. So it's a lot less work for you and it actually makes it easier for kids to participate. So tell us about total participation techniques and why they're so important.
They started off as a recommendation for teachers and working with ELs, and that recommendation was just to keep them on task and to help them focus by really just keeping them accountable. Mm-hmm. So total participation techniques are just ways to get evidence that every single student is with you at the same time, and evidence from the students that they're also using higher order thinking. They're so important because so many students it's focusing not just on the actual time spent in the classroom or in your school, but actually how much time is being spent learning. And so it's just maximizing the amount of learning that can take place.
So all of that is really good because I hear what you're saying. It's hard for a teacher to gauge, are students listening or are they learning? Are they really engaged? Are they really comprehending? And so it sounds like that's what these are really designed to address. So can you elaborate a little bit more on how teachers can provide access to higher order thinking opportunities for all their students?
Absolutely. So one of the things that we tend to fall back on as teachers is the traditional Q&A where we shoot out a question, and the question is basically whoever raises their hand gets to answer the question.
Right.
And so total participation techniques is flipping that. And the ripple, if you can picture kind of like a bullseye or a ripple, it starts with the initial plunk of a pebble in a pond. And that initial plunk would be every individual student or the individual child first being accountable to answering it, the question or the prompt, and then going out to pairs or small groups. And then from there, the outer ripple being, then you take it to the whole group with a traditional Q&A where you've allowed every single student to first answer your question. Now that's really important when we're talking about higher order thinking because the higher order prompts take longer to process. And if you're talking about students who are shy, who are students with special needs, even students who are gifted, English language learners particularly, they need time. And so that ripple, when it's a higher order prompt, that ripple gives them time. And so participation techniques are kind of all using that mentality where we start first with the individual and then we ripple out.
So I've heard you say before that if a teacher wants to find out what students know, then calling on them in class should really be sort of the last resort instead of really our first go-to strategy. We should be thinking about this in terms of like that ripple effect. Can you talk more about that?
Absolutely, yeah. The ripple, the whole idea behind that is that I'm no longer just calling on a kid. When the question is really worth thinking about, and when it's something that I want every student to show me evidence that they understand, then calling on someone is going to be the last thing I do. I'm first going to want to get evidence from every individual student, and then I'm going to let them process it together really quickly, and then it's okay to call on them. So it's not saying that you would never call on a child, but that you should first provide them with opportunities to answer individually. That's really important for when it comes to higher order thinking prompts. And when you have prompts that are not necessarily that important, or questions that, you might just be reviewing what you went over the day before, then a simple share it with your neighbor is good enough.
Okay, let's talk about some specific examples then so we can make sure we're on the same page. Let's talk about some total participation techniques that teachers can use in their classrooms.
There are 5 chapters. The first one is called Onthespot TPTs, and an example of that is a chalkboard splash. We want to see what every student is thinking, and so it's one of those on-the-spot things that doesn't require any planning or paper or anything like that.
That's always a good thing.
And what it is, exactly. So this with the chalkboard splash, you just come up with your prompt, and you say to the students, I want you to answer it at your desk really quickly, answer the prompt, and then have them boil it down to 15 words or less and write it anywhere on the chalkboard. And so they all walk up to the chalkboard as they're processing their prompts once they have it finished. And so it looks like all your students are up there. They just find any open spot, and there's several pictures of it. If you look up Chalkboard Splash online, you'll see people have posted pictures of it. It's just a neat way to get a response, to actually visualize and look at what are your students thinking about what you just taught.
So this is something you use at the end of the lesson then?
Sometimes it's in the beginning, sometimes it's in the middle, and sometimes it's at the end. It's whenever you find yourself thinking, I wonder what they're thinking, I wonder how they're processing this. And so sometimes I will plan it. I'll have it written right into my lesson plans, but sometimes it's just on the spot. I just want to know, what are they processing? And sometimes it's just a so what? How should we feel about this? What is the big idea here? And they take it and they put it in their own words, 15 words or less.
And so you have the entire class do this? They all go up to the board at one time, or how does that work?
Well, usually what it looks like is that they start trickling up because they first write it at their desks.
Okay, got it.
And so you'll see them kind of filter up. And it's probably, I would say, 3 minutes. It doesn't take long at all, but they're filtering up. They're just grabbing a piece of chalk and writing it down. But first they've had to process it, and so whoever's done first is the first one to go up.
So they're summarizing their answer in 15 words or less, and they write it down, and then when they're ready, then they go up and they put it on the board and they share it with the whole class. And do you discuss it at that point? Yeah,
then we typically we ask the students to look at what their peers have written and sum it up. What do they see as some commonalities or big ideas that they see that are emerging from what they see?
Oh, I like that a lot, to ask the kids to look for patterns.
Right. Well, and they can also look for surprises. Like, what are some things that you didn't really think of, and you see that other your peers have written down. So they look for surprises, similarities, commonalities, those types of things.
That's great. I love that. That's nice and simple. Okay, let's talk about another one.
Yeah. Hold-ups. The next big idea with the TPTs are hold-ups. And these can be used from kindergarten through college, and I use them all the time in college, actually. Basically, they're just, whenever you have a set choice of options for something, for example, let's say you're talking about Bloom's taxonomy, so you have 6 choices. And you just ask the students, you describe something, and you ask the students to hold up which option you think you're describing. Having them discuss together, they may not agree. And so you can do that all the way up through college.
So they have the different answer choices written down, and then they hold up the one that they choose. Is that right?
Exactly. So like one that we use a lot is that we can use with anything is the true, not true, true with modifications, and unable to determine for a specific reason. Mm-hmm. So we've got that fits anything. So those cards are already made up, and we have little TPT Ziplocs things that have materials that we always use, and that's in there because those you never have to reprint.
Right. So the idea is that you're sort of thinking about the types of responses you can use for multiple activities. That way you don't have to do this every time. And something like true, not true, true with, what did you say, modifications?
Right. True with modifications. Yep.
And then
that
can't
actually
determine.
Came from an experience that I had working with my first grade class. And we would predict what was going to happen next in the chapter as we were reading books. And we would say, was it true? Was it not true? And of course, there were times that it wasn't true or not true. And so one of the kids said to me, well, Mrs. Himmele, that's not really true, and it's not really not true. And I said, you're so right. So we added that option, true with modification.
Yeah, that's a great option. I love the idea of giving kids opportunity to think about nuance, because kids do like to sort of think of those exceptions and loopholes, and we want to encourage that kind of divergent thinking. But then when the activity only allows 2 options, then you're sort of shutting that down. Right. So I like the idea of having these 3 options, and then of course the 4th one, unable to determine, because maybe you don't have enough information or whatever. So each of those 4 cards, basically, they're already pre-printed, pre-cut out. They're inside a Ziploc baggie. The kids just pull out their baggie at the beginning of the activity, and then they can just hold up the card as you go through the questions. Right. Is that right?
I find myself more often than not printing the cards. I know that the cards are already made, and we use the true, not true a lot. But I find it's just so simple to create 4 cards, and they can be small so that you can use several on one page. And just hand them out to the students. So it doesn't take a lot of paper. Maybe 10 sheets is enough for 40 students. But it oftentimes it does take printing out the cards, but it's worth it.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. That's a great engagement strategy. Okay, so we've got the hold-ups. Yeah. What's another type of total participation technique that teachers can use?
There's a chapter called TPTs involving movement, because the movement is so important for getting students to wake up and just to be ready to learn. And research that we talk about in the book looks at when we get interaction going, it perks them up so that they're ready to listen for longer stretches of time. So there's one called the feature walk, and it basically is using what content, that is a content text. And when you find yourself with a text that has a lot of features, pictures, diagrams, maps, charts, tables, that would be ideal, an ideal chapter to use for a feature walk. And what we do is we photocopy each of the features, so maybe there's 5, and we make them, enlarge them to about the size of paper, and we hang them on the wall. And so we divide up the class so that they each go to one of the features, and we give them specific prompts that they need to respond to that are related to the features. And so then we ring a bell after they've answered their prompts, and they move either clockwise or counterclockwise to the next feature. And so they're looking at the feature, responding to prompts. What is the feature telling us? Why is it important? Why did the author include it? and then the bell rings, they go on to the next feature. And one of the things that they might have is Post-its, where they can respond, leave the Post-it there or on the back of the paper, and go to the next feature. And so each group is kind of rotating to new pictures or features, and it just helps them really process what was really meaty in the chapter, because the features oftentimes contain so much important information that kids don't always really stop and think about.
Mm-hmm. How much time are they spending at each feature before they move on to the next rotation?
I would say no more than 5 minutes. Typically the first rotation is longer, and then they get the hang of it and they start finishing more quickly.
When they're at the feature, are they talking about it with the other people who are in their group, or are they just writing down their own thoughts?
Typically, they start off silent, and then they start talking, and then they don't shut up.
Okay, so we've got the feature walk, and that's a type of TPT involving movement. Another total participation technique that you've talked about is guided note-taking. Can you give us an example of that one?
Our favorite with that one, my favorite anyway, is pause, star, rank. And that one is, oftentimes, there's so much, they've listened to you for, just, you feel like you've been talking so long. Mm-hmm. And a pause, star, rank allows them to stop and look at all their notes. That's the pause part. And then put a star next to anything in their notes that is important. And then take whatever they've starred, take the top 3 and rank them. And that top ranking item is oftentimes put into a chalkboard splash. So they now come on up here and put your number 1 item on the chalkboard.
Oh, that's great.
And so they all have different ones. Yeah, they all have different items, but I've done this with over 200 people, and it's really cool to see, what they all thought was important. It's so cool because you see different things that they took away. It's very personal, and yet it gives them time. They just really need it to process.
Yeah, I love that, and I'm betting that it's probably pretty rare that 2 people even pick the same thing. Everyone sort of has their own idea of what is most important. That gives you a lot of windows into students' thinking process and sort of their personalities too. Like, what do they value? What resonates with them? What connects for them?
It is so interesting. And what I noticed is, in particular when I do this with adults, they're walking around reading each other's and they're taking notes. And it's so cool to see them doing that because they're basically just learning from each other. Yeah, that was important. I forgot about that. Or and so it's really neat. We do that in our classrooms all the time. That's something you can throw in without a whole lot of planning. Doesn't take any forethought really, because the steps are just pause, read over your notes, and star what you think is important, rank the top 3, and then chalkboard splash it.
I love that one. So the final category of total participation techniques that you wanted to talk about is the wrap-ups. I'm assuming that means the ones that you're going to do at the end of the lesson?
Yes. The wrap-ups are ways to finish a lesson. A pause, star, rank is one of the common wrap-ups, but that one is in a guided note-taking just because it's good for helping them process a lot of what they've been listening to and recording notes on. But the wrap-up chapter has techniques that allow them to just sum it up for you and give you back the most essential components of what you just taught or what they've learned in that time with you. And one of them is called the 1, 2, 3 o'clock. And 1, 2, 3 o'clock, I have to go back a little and say there's a handout in the book, and it's on our website as well, that is called the appointment agenda. And the appointment agenda is just, it looks like a time, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way to 12 o'clock, and you gather appointments. So for 1 o'clock, I might have Jason as my appointment for 1 o'clock. And I walk around and I make appointments the very first day of class with students. Every student's walking around making appointments with each other. so that I can say at any point, meet up with your 2 p.m. appointment, and the students will already be paired. They'll already have a 2 p.m. appointment. It's just a great way to group students. And so the 1, 2, 3 o'clock is just 3 questions that you put on a slide or you put on a handout, and you might have them answer that and then say, all right, meet up with your 1 o'clock appointment, and answer the 1 o'clock. And then I have a little triangle, a musical triangle I bring. All right, it's 2 o'clock, meet up with your 2 o'clock appointment.
So the idea here is that the clock is just sort of a way to pair the students up, and the time that the partner that you have them choose isn't really related to the time. So you could do, choose your 7 o'clock, get with your 7 o'clock partner, even though it's not 7 o'clock.
Right.
That's just a way to sort of pair them. Is that right?
Exactly. The clock has nothing to do with it. It's basically just a list of people, and times are right next to it. And this is the very first thing we do in every class, and then the students hold on to that for the entire semester.
So essentially what it's doing is it's giving you a quick and easy way to pair kids up with people they're comfortable with, because they've chosen those 12 people. So if there's someone in the room that they're not comfortable working with, those people won't be on their clock. These are 12 people who they have agreed to work with. That person has agreed with them. So the kids are comfortable with their partners, and they're not just working with the same 1 or 2 people over and over. These are 12 people in the classroom that they've agreed to work with. And so you can sort of rotate through the times to make sure that they're working with a variety of people.
Exactly.
So we've got these total participation techniques that are on the spot. We have the hold-ups, where you can just hold up the card for the different answers. We have TPTs involving movement, like the feature walk. Mm-hmm. We have guided note-taking, like the pause, star, and rank. And then we have sort of wrap-ups, like the 1, 2, 3 o'clock. And I think what I like best about these is that teachers aren't wasting time trying to figure out which students are learning during a lesson and which students are stuck, because all of these are allowing you to observe the growth as it happens. Can you talk about the impact of that on the classroom culture?
Yes, absolutely. And one of the things that we did with total participation techniques, the book is actually experiences with classroom teachers in 5th through 8th grade. And the second edition actually goes from 1st through 12th grade. But the first edition was actually 8 teachers in a 5th through 8th grade middle school. And what we noticed was the classroom culture. The students just started talking to each other outside of the classrooms as well. Like in the hallways, it's harder not to say hello to a student that you've talked to in class, that you've had interactions with. And so the classroom community was really stronger, the student to student. And also, the teachers were surprised by how much the students knew, and they started to get to know the students more closely, because they've had insight into their thoughts, and the students share more. And so the teacher likes the students more, and the teachers are more connected to the students. And so it just really does build rapport as well as help with the learning.
I like that these are also really easy ways to make sure that access to the learning material is equitable in your classroom, because equity is something that is can be really hard to make sure that you are prioritizing in your classroom. And all of these, that's just sort of built into it, right? Like I know that's something that you're really passionate about.
Absolutely. There's this great article that was written, we talk about in the book, it's called The Receivement Gap. And basically, when you have your students, only certain students answering your questions, the students who haven't had a whole lot of success with school, they're not necessarily getting the same learning time that the others are. And this really does provide that way of getting more equity among students.
And I feel like it also sort of counters teacher bias too, because as much as we like to think that we treat all of our students equally,
Right.
we really don't. And I know that when I think about my own teaching practice in the past, I found myself wanting to call on certain students more than others and involve them more than others. And sometimes we don't really realize that we're even doing it. So using these kind of techniques ensures that we are not, that our biases aren't impacting the type of engagement we have in our classroom or holding students back.
Absolutely, and that is true at every level. I know that I fall guilty of that as well. It's hard not to count on those students who, really love to respond, and so you're having this conversation with these few students while your other students are completely drifting. And, it's so easy to do that, and this really just prevents that from happening.
So if teachers want to learn more about your work, if they want to get resources from you, first off, I'm going to put some of these photos that you're talking about in the blog post for this, and I will also have those downloads that you were talking about so they can get them there. But tell us about where we can go to learn more from you and where we can find out about the book.
Our website is basically totalparticipationtechniques.com, so it's the title, totalparticipationtechniques.com. And there's several resources that are there, including videos that look at some of the bigger ideas. The book is available through ASCD. It's also available through Amazon. The second edition was just released, so we need to upload that information on our website, but it'll be up in a couple of weeks.
I'm really looking forward to checking out the second edition. I read the first edition a couple of years ago when it came out and was just so blown away by how many things were in there that seemed like common sense and yet I'd never thought to do, which are sort of my favorite teaching strategies, the ones that just seem super intuitive. Like you hear it and you think, yes, that would totally work with students. And it's just full of those. And then you've got the printable resources in the back so teachers can just print out like the hold-up cards and everything are already in there, so you can just print them out, run off your photocopies, and you're good to go.
Right. And there's also a couple of posters back there in the back that they say things like calling on someone should be the last thing you do. A simple little thing, but a reminder, don't call them. If it's an important question, be sure to give access to all the students.
If there was one thing that you wanted every teacher who is listening to this to know about participation, equity, about using these types of techniques in the classroom, what is it that you wish all teachers knew about that?
Calling on someone should be the last thing you do. I guess I'd go right back to that statement. That doesn't mean you wouldn't call on someone, but when you do call on someone, everyone is off the hook except for that one student that you called on. And so it's really got to be a mindset of, okay, I want evidence that every student is learning. How am I going to do that? When it's important enough for everyone to learn, you ought to make sure that every single student is going to give you that evidence. And it can be simple. It can be a 2-minute little pause. It doesn't have to be a big, to do. There are activities in here that will take a long time, but there are some that will take 2 minutes. And so those are really important if you're looking at teaching all children.
It doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be a big deal. And I think maybe one other piece that I want to add to that is that you don't have to have 5,000 of these techniques. Am I right about that?
Right.
Like you can just have.
Absolutely.
That's one thing that I feel like a trap that I feel like a lot of teachers run into, where it's like every lesson they want to have some different method. And it's extremely exhausting to try to do that. And it's not necessary. I mean, I've found that if you have like 10 to 15 of these types of strategies that you rotate through over and over and over, the kids learn them, they expect them, and then you're not wasting time in class explaining them and trying to make sure kids know what to do. So try to, that would be my advice to teachers, thinking about the first edition of this book that I've read of yours is go through and pick one or two from each category. Put that into regular rotation in your teaching practice. Get the kids really familiar with them so they just come naturally to you and the kids. And then you can switch them out throughout the school year. But you don't have to have this in your bag of teacher tricks. You don't have to have a million different things in there. Pick a few things that are super effective with your students and keep rotating those through lessons over and over. Do you agree with that approach?
Oh, I absolutely do. As a matter of fact, one of the things, we have a chapter in here that looks at the pitfalls, and one of the things that we write about is that the pitfall, that one of the most common ones we see, is that the teachers are so enamored with an activity that they'll force it. Mm-hmm. And instead, look at your goal. What is it that you're trying to teach? What is the content? And then choose the activity from that point. And oftentimes, it is the same activity you used, yesterday. It does not have to be it does not have to be 20 different things. Oftentimes, it is all about the learning. It's not about the activity. Are they learning? And what evidence can you get that they're learning? And so that's really got to be key. That it's not the activity that's going to do it. It's your mindset, really, that whole shift of show me that you learned it.
Show me that you learned it. I love that. That's so good. Thanks so much for sharing this with us.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me.
A big thanks to Persida for joining me here on the show and sharing these awesome resources. You can go to truthforteachers.com and look for episode 103 to download some free printables from Persida and learn more about the book. Have a great week, and remember, it's not going to be easy. It's going to be worth it. Truth for Teachers is a proud member of the Education Podcast Network. Podcasts for educators, podcasts by educators. For more great podcast recommendations, go to edupodcastnetwork.com. That's edupodcastnetwork.com.